My name is Brielle Morrison and I'm 23 years old. Last Saturday should have been the proudest day of my life, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in biomedical engineering from Stanford. Instead, it became the day I watched my parents' faces drain of all color as they realized the magnitude of their betrayal. For years, they funded my sister's party lifestyle at a state school while I worked 3 jobs to pay for my education. They thought they knew which daughter would succeed. They were dead wrong. What happened next at that graduation ceremony would shatter our family forever and expose a web of lies that ran deeper than I ever imagined. Before we dive into this family revenge drama that'll make your jaw drop, I need to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about justice being served, ice cold, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Because trust me, you won't want to miss how this family betrayal gets the karma it deserves. Let's get into it. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, the Morrison household operated on an unspoken but crystal clear hierarchy. My younger sister Amber was the golden child, blonde, bubbly, and blessed with the kind of effortless charm that made adults melt. Meanwhile, I was the studious one, always buried in books, always trying twice as hard for half the recognition. The disparity became glaringly obvious during our teenage years. When Amber wanted to join the expensive cheerleading squad, Mom and Dad didn't hesitate to write the check. When I asked for money for AP exam fees and SAT prep courses, suddenly the budget was tight. "You're so smart," Brielle Mom would say with that patronizing smile. "You'll figure out a way to make it work." And I did figure it out. I babysat every weekend, tutored struggling classmates, and spent summers working at the local library instead of going to summer camps like Amber. While she was getting her nails done and shopping for homecoming dresses, I was calculating how many hours I'd need to work to afford my next textbook. The college application process revealed the true extent of their favoritism. Amber announced she wanted to go to State University, not because of their academic programs but because her boyfriend was going there and they had the best parties. Without blinking, our parents promised to cover her full tuition, room and board, plus a generous monthly allowance for expenses. When my Stanford acceptance letter arrived, I was over the moon. Stanford had been my dream school since middle school, and getting in with a partial scholarship felt like validation of all those sleepless nights studying. I rushed to show my parents, expecting them to be proud, maybe even excited enough to help with the remaining costs. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice, honey, but Stanford is expensive. We're already committed to Amber's education." "But Dad," I pleaded, "this is Stanford. And I got a partial scholarship. I only need help with about $30,000 a year." Mom chimed in from the kitchen, not even bothering to face me. "Brielle, you've always been resourceful. Take out loans. It builds character." Character. As if watching them fund my sister's shopping sprees while I wore thrift store clothes hadn't already built enough character. That night I made a decision that would define the next 4 years of my life. I would go to Stanford, but I would do it entirely on my own. I took out maximum student loans, applied for every scholarship I could find, and lined up 3 part-time jobs before I even set foot on campus. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my parents saw my academic success as a given, something that required no investment or encouragement, they viewed Amber's mediocre grades as needing all the financial support they could to provide. It was as if they believed that throwing money at her would somehow transform her into the daughter they thought I already was. As I packed for Stanford with second-hand dorm supplies and a laptop I'd saved for 2 years to buy, I overheard my parents discussing Amber's care package, filled with expensive skincare products, designer clothes, and a brand new MacBook Pro. The message was clear: Amber's comfort mattered. My success was expected and therefore unremarkable. But what they didn't realize was that their neglect was forging me into something they never anticipated. Every rejection, every dismissal, every time they chose Amber over me was building a fire inside me that would eventually consume everything they thought they knew about their daughters. Stanford was simultaneously the best and worst 4 years of my life. While my classmates worried about fraternity parties and spring break plans, I was mapping out my work schedule around my class schedule around my study schedule. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings I worked at the campus coffee shop from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. slinging lattes to bleary-eyed students who were just heading to bed as I was starting my day. Tuesday and Thursday evenings found me tutoring organic chemistry to pre-med students who paid me $25 an hour, money I desperately needed, but that reminded me daily of the financial freedom my parents had. Casually handed to Amber. Weekends were reserved for my job at a local bookstore, where I'd spend 8-hour shifts on my feet, reorganizing shelves and helping customers while mentally reviewing lecture notes. The physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional toll. Every few weeks I'd get a call from Amber bubbling with excitement about some new adventure funded by our parents' generosity. Spring break in Cancun, a brand new car for her 20th birthday, a summer internship in Europe that was more vacation than work experience. Each conversation felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already festering wound. "Oh my God, Brie," she'd gush during one particularly painful call during my sophomore year. "Mom and Dad just surprised me with a trip to Paris for my birthday. Can you believe it? I'm going to see the Eiffel Tower. I was sitting in my tiny dorm room eating ramen for the 4th night in a row because it was all I could afford, after paying for my textbooks. That's amazing, Amber. I'm so happy for you. What are you doing for your birthday next month?" She asked the question so innocent yet so devastating. "Working," I replied simply because what else was there to say? The academic pressure was relentless, but I refused to let my financial situation affect my grades. If anything, it pushed me harder. I maintained a 3.9 gigapascals while working 30 hours a week, a feat that my academic advisor called remarkable and my parents called expected. During my rare phone calls home, they'd ask perfunctory questions about my grades, but never about my well-being, never about whether I needed anything, never offering the support they lavished so freely on Amber. Junior year brought a particularly cruel reminder of the disparity. Amber had changed her major for the 3rd time, from communications to psychology, to finally settling on general studies, which meant she'd need an extra semester to graduate. Without hesitation, our parents agreed to fund the additional time, even upgrading her to a luxury apartment off campus. Meanwhile, I was accepted into a prestigious summer research program at MIT that could have opened doors to top graduate schools. The only catch: it was unpaid and I couldn't afford to give up my summer job income. I had to turn it down and watch the opportunity go to a classmate whose parents could afford to support their daughter's dreams. That summer, while Amber posted Instagram photos from her European adventure, I worked double shifts at a restaurant, saving every penny for senior year. My hands were permanently stained with coffee, and my back ached from long hours on my feet, but I was building something my parents couldn't see: resilience, determination, and a quiet rage that would soon have its day. The breaking point came during my senior year when I overheard a phone conversation between my parents and Amber. She was calling to ask for money to cover a spring break trip to Miami, her 3rd vacation that year. They discussed it like it was a given, debating only whether to transfer $2,000 or $3,000 to her account. That same week, I'd been surviving on peanut butter sandwiches because I'd had to choose between groceries and my final semester's lab fees. I never called to ask for help because I knew what the answer would be. Instead, I picked up an additional shift at the campus library, working until 2 a.m. to make ends meet. But with each rejection, each dismissal, each time I watched them celebrate Amber's mediocrity while ignoring my excellence, I was building a case, not just in my mind but literally. I kept every receipt, every loan document, every piece of evidence of the financial inequality that had defined our family dynamic. I told myself it was for personal records, but deep down I knew I was preparing for something bigger. The real turning point came 3 months before graduation, during what should have been a celebration of my acceptance to Johns Hopkins' prestigious biomedical engineering graduate program with a full research assistantship. I'd worked for 4 years toward this moment, not just academically but personally. This acceptance validated every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I'd skipped to save money. I called home immediately, practically vibrating with excitement. Mom answered and I could hear the TV in the background, some reality show she and Amber had been binge-watching lately. "Mom, I got in Johns Hopkins, accepted me into their graduate program with full funding. I'm going to be working on groundbreaking research in neural engineering." "That's nice, sweetheart," she replied, her voice distracted. "Amber, turn it down, I can't hear." "Nice. 4 years of academic excellence, a acceptance into one of the top programs in the country, and it was nice." "Mom, did you hear what I said? This is Johns Hopkins. They're only accepting 12 students nationwide and they're paying me to be there." "I heard you, Brielle. We're very proud." "Listen, can I call you back? Amber's having boy trouble and we're trying to figure out if she should drop her classes this semester to focus on her mental health." The line went dead and I sat in my dorm room staring at my phone, the acceptance email still glowing on my laptop screen. Amber was considering dropping out of her 6th year of college because of boy trouble, and that warranted more concern than my life-changing achievement. That night I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of our family forever. I started documenting everything systematically. Not just the financial disparity but the emotional neglect, the casual dismissal of my achievements, the way my parents treated my success as inevitable while treating Amber's failures as worthy of endless support and resources. I created a spreadsheet, because of course I did, I'm an engineer, tracking every dollar they'd spent on Amber versus what they'd spent on me over the past 4 years. The numbers were staggering. Between tuition, room and board living expenses, vacations, and random emergencies, they'd invested over $180, 0 inches Amber's college experience. Their investment in mine $0, unless you counted the $50 Target gift card they'd sent for my birthday sophomore year. But it wasn't just about money. I started screenshotting their social media posts where Amber's mediocre achievements were celebrated with long gushing captions, while my accomplishments were either ignored or mentioned in passing. When Amber finally passed organic chemistry on her 3rd attempt, Mom posted a 3-paragraph tribute to her persistence and dedication. When I published my first research paper as an undergraduate, something that typically happens only at the graduate level, it didn't even merit a Facebook mention. The final straw came 6 weeks before graduation. Amber called me crying because she'd failed 2 classes and wouldn't be able to graduate that spring after all. Her solution: she wanted our parents to pay for summer courses plus an additional semester, extending her college career to 6 full years, and they agreed. Just like that. The conversation I overheard that night between my parents revealed the depth of their delusion. "Well, at least we don't have to worry about Brielle," Dad said. "She's always landed on her feet." "Exactly," Mom agreed. "Amber needs us more. Brielle is just naturally successful." Naturally successful. As if my achievements had materialized out of thin air rather than through grinding determination and countless sacrifices they'd never bothered to notice or acknowledge. That's when I started planning what would happen at graduation. They'd already told me they'd be attending, not because they were particularly proud but because it would look good to their friends. They'd booked a nice hotel, made dinner reservations, and invited extended family to witness their daughter's graduation from Stanford. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning my own surprise. The research I'd been conducting wasn't just academic, it was personal. I'd spent months reaching out to journalists, connecting with advocacy groups, and building relationships with people who specialized in exposing family dynamics like ours. The story of academic achievement ignored while mediocrity was rewarded wasn't just my story, it was a pattern that resonated with countless others. I started to see my situation not as a personal failing but as a case study in the kind of parental favoritism that destroys families and wastes human potential. And I realized that graduation day wouldn't just be about receiving my diploma. It would be about delivering a lesson my parents would never forget. You know what? I can see you're as invested in this justice story as I am. If you're wondering how this family drama is going to explode at graduation, hit that like button because we're about to get to the part where everything changes. And trust me, you'll want to subscribe because the way this revenge unfolds is going to leave you speechless. Let's keep going. The best part is coming. With 8 weeks until graduation, I transformed from an overworked student into a methodical investigator. My engineering background had taught me the value of data, evidence, and systematic analysis, skills I was about to apply to expose the truth about my family's dysfunction. My first breakthrough came through social media analysis. Using archived posts and photos spanning 4 years, I created a comprehensive timeline of my parents' public celebration of Amber versus their silence about my achievements. The contrast was damning. Amber's decision to change majors warranted a proud post about finding her passion. My acceptance into 3 prestigious graduate programs radio silence. But the financial investigation revealed something far more disturbing. Through careful analysis of overheard conversations, casual mentions of expenses, and some strategic questioning during phone calls, I pieced together the true scope of their investment in Amber's extended college experience. It wasn't just the obvious costs, like tuition and housing. There were emergency transfers for everything from concert tickets to car repairs, a spring break trip that cost more than my entire semester's meal plan, and countless shopping sprees disguised as necessities. The most shocking discovery came through Amber herself. During one of our regular calls, she mentioned how grateful she was that our parents had agreed to pay off her credit card debt again. I mean, I know it's only $8,000 this time, but still, she said casually, as if our parents regularly bailing her out of financial trouble was as natural as breathing. $8,000. I had been surviving on $30 a week for groceries, and they just casually erased $8,000 of her shopping debt. I started keeping a running total of these small interventions, and the number quickly climbed past $50. 0 inches additional support beyond her basic college expenses. Meanwhile, I discovered something that made my blood boil. Through a conversation with our cousin, I learned that my parents had been telling extended family that they were supporting both girls through college. They'd been accepting congratulations and praise for their generous parenting while I worked myself to exhaustion just to stay enrolled. This revelation led me to reach out to other family members, and what I discovered painted an even darker picture. My grandmother had been setting aside money in a college fund specifically for me, money my parents had convinced her to redirect toward Amber's greater need. My aunt had offered to help with my expenses multiple times, only to be told by my parents that it wasn't necessary because they had it handled. They hadn't just neglected to support me, they had actively prevented others from helping, while maintaining the facade that they were equally invested in both daughters' success. The emotional manipulation ran even deeper. I started recording phone conversations with their permission initially to share updates about my research work. But these recordings revealed a pattern of subtle gaslighting that I'd been experiencing for years. My achievements were consistently minimized. Well, you've always been good at school. My struggles were dismissed. You're so independent, you don't need help like Amber does. And my future was taken for granted. We know you'll flat and raid. Be successful no matter what. Most devastatingly, I discovered that they'd been using my success to justify their neglect. See how well Brielle turned out without much help, I overheard Dad telling a family friend. It proves that sometimes the best thing you can do for a kid is let them figure it out themselves. Let them figure it out themselves. As if their abandonment was a carefully considered parenting strategy rather than simple favoritism. Armed with this evidence, I began reaching out to local media outlets that specialized in human interest stories. My case wasn't unique. Family favoritism that followed gender lines, birth order preferences, or simply personality-based discrimination was more common than most people realized. But my story had elements that made it particularly compelling: the stark financial disparity, the public documentation through social media, and the upcoming graduation ceremony that would serve as a perfect backdrop for revelation. 3 weeks before graduation, I connected with Sarah Martinez, a journalist who specialized in exposing family dysfunction and its long-term effects on children's development. Sarah was immediately interested in my story, particularly the documentation I'd gathered and the systematic nature of the favoritism I'd experienced. "What you're describing isn't just family preference," Sarah told me during our first interview. "It's a form of emotional and financial abuse that's often overlooked because the favored child appears to be thriving. But what happens to families when the successful child finally says enough?" That was exactly the question I intended to answer. Working with Sarah, I prepared a comprehensive exposé that would run the week after graduation. But that was just the beginning. I'd also been in contact with Stanford's alumni magazine, which was interested in featuring my story as part of a series on students who'd overcome significant obstacles to achieve academic success. The irony that my greatest obstacle had been my own family wasn't lost on anyone involved. 2 weeks before graduation, everything began falling into place with the precision I'd learned to apply to my engineering projects. The media interest had grown beyond what I'd initially imagined. What started as a local human interest story had caught the attention of national outlets interested in exploring the hidden dynamics of family favoritism and its impact on academic achievement. Sarah Martinez had been incredible to work with, helping me understand that my experience was part of a larger pattern affecting countless families. Through her research network, I'd connected with other young adults who'd experienced similar treatment. The siblings who'd been expected to be self-sufficient while their brothers or sisters received unlimited support. My story was becoming part of a broader conversation about unconscious bias in parenting and its devastating effects on family relationships. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source: Dr. Patricia Williams, a family psychology professor at Stanford who'd been following my case through Sarah, reached out with an offer that changed everything. She wanted to feature my story in her research on achievement-based family dynamics and invited me to co-present our findings at a national psychology conference the week after graduation. "Your documentation is extraordinary," Dr. Williams told me during our meeting. "Most people experiencing this kind of family dynamic don't recognize the patterns until much later in life, and they certainly don't have the evidence you've gathered. This could help countless other families recognize and address these destructive patterns." The academic validation felt incredible, but it also solidified my resolve about what needed to happen at graduation. This wasn't just about my personal vindication anymore. It was about exposing a form of family dysfunction that masqueraded as normal parenting. I'd already confirmed that my parents Amber and 12 extended family members would be attending graduation. They'd made a whole weekend of it, booking expensive hotel rooms and planning celebration dinners that I wasn't expected to pay for but also hadn't been consulted about. The assumption was that I'd be grateful for their presence and attention, finally receiving the family celebration that had been notably absent throughout my college career. What they didn't know was that I'd arranged for Sarah Martinez to attend graduation as well, along with a photographer who specialized in documenting family dynamics. With my permission, they'd be capturing the moment when my parents realized that their years of favoritism were about to become very public. I'd also prepared something special for the ceremony itself. As the student speaker for biomedical engineering, an honor that my parents had acknowledged with a brief "that's nice" during a phone call, I'd have the opportunity to address not just my graduating class, but their families as well. My speech was already written, and while it appeared to be a standard reflection on perseverance and achievement, Those who knew my story would recognize the deeper message about recognizing and overcoming the obstacles that sometimes come from the people who should be supporting you most. The week before graduation, I received a call from Mom asking what I wanted for a graduation gift. The question was so absurd given their 4 years of neglect that I almost laughed. "Nothing, Mom. I've gotten myself this far without help. I think I can handle the rest." "Don't be like that, Brielle. We want to celebrate your achievement." "Do you, though?" I asked, and for the first time in years I didn't filter my words. "Because for 4 years you've treated my achievements like they were inevitable while throwing money at Amber's every failure and calling it support." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice tight with defensiveness. "That's not fair, Brielle. Amber needed more help than you did." "Needed it, or just asked for it louder?" Another silence. "Then we'll see you at graduation. We're proud of you." But I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the first crack in their carefully constructed narrative about their parenting choices. They were starting to realize that their independent daughter had been paying attention to everything they thought she was too busy to notice. 3 days before graduation, I received an email that felt like a sign from the universe. Johns Hopkins had offered me an additional fellowship that would cover not just my graduate studies but also provide funding for a research project of my choosing. The project I'd proposed, a comprehensive study on the long-term effects of academic achievement being ignored or minimized by family members. My success had given me a platform to turn my personal experience into research that could help others. And graduation day would be the moment when my parents finally understood that their neglect hadn't just shaped my character, it had shaped my life's work. Graduation morning arrived with the kind of perfect California sunshine that made everything feel cinematic. I woke up at 5 a.m., not from nerves but from excitement. After 4 years of grinding, of proving myself over and over again to people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, today was the day I'd finally get to show my parents exactly what their favoritism had cost them. I put on my cap and gown with the gold honors cords I'd earned through relentless dedication and looked at myself in the mirror. The young woman staring back at me bore little resemblance to the insecure teenager who'd left for Stanford 4 years ago. That girl had been desperate for her parents' approval. This woman had learned to create her own validation. My family arrived at the ceremony early, dressed to the nines and practically glowing with pride they'd never shown before. Amber looked slightly uncomfortable. Over the past few months, my pointed questions during our phone calls had made her realize the disparity in our treatment, though she'd never acknowledged it directly. My parents, however, were in full performance mode, greeting other families with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who'd actually been involved in their child's college experience. "There's our graduate," Dad boomed when he saw me, pulling me into an awkward hug that felt foreign after years of emotional distance. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." The words rang hollow, especially since Sarah Martinez was standing just 20 feet away observing their performance with the trained eye of someone who'd heard my story in detail. But I smiled and played along because the best part was still coming. As the student speaker for biomedical engineering, I was scheduled to address the graduating class and their families during the ceremony. My parents had no idea what I planned to say. They'd never asked to see my speech, just as they'd never asked about any other aspect of my college experience. When my name was called, I walked to the podium with 4 years of suppressed truth burning in my chest. The speech I delivered was carefully crafted to sound inspiring and grateful to casual listeners, but every word was chosen to expose the reality of my experience to those who knew how to hear it. 4 years ago, I came to Stanford with nothing but determination and a willingness to work for everything I wanted. I began looking directly at my parents in the audience. I learned that success isn't about the resources you're given, it's about the resources you create for yourself when no one else believes you're worth the investment. I saw Mom's smile flicker slightly, the first sign that she was beginning to understand this wasn't the grateful daughter's speech she'd expected. I want to thank everyone who supported me through this journey, I continued. My professors who saw potential in a student working 3 jobs. My research advisors who gave me opportunities typically reserved for graduate students. My employers who worked around my class schedule. And most importantly, I want to thank everyone who didn't support me, because you taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that the only validation that matters is the validation you give yourself. The applause was thunderous, but I could see my parents' faces beginning to drain of color as the implication of my words sank in. Dad's proud smile was freezing into something more like confusion, while Mom looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle in real time. But I wasn't done. The conclusion of my speech was the moment I'd been building toward for months. Today, I'm not just graduating summa cum laude from Stanford, I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the ceremony. I'm also proud to announce that my research on family dynamics and academic achievement has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Family Psychology, and will be featured in a documentary about educational inequality that premieres next month on PBS. The camera flashes started then, not just from proud family members but from the professional photographer Sarah had arranged. My parents were looking around in confusion, starting to realize that this ceremony was bigger than they'd understood. The documentary explores how family favoritism affects long-term academic outcomes. I continued, and features families where financial support was allocated based on perceived need rather than actual achievement. I'm grateful that my family agreed to participate in this research, because their story is helping to change how we understand the real costs of playing favorites with children. That's when my parents' faces went completely white. Dad's mouth actually fell open as he realized that their family's private dynamics were about to become very public. Mom grabbed Dad's arm, her eyes wide with something between shock and panic. After the ceremony, as other families celebrated with photos and congratulations, my parents approached me with the kind of careful steps usually reserved for approaching wild animals. "Brielle," Dad said, his voice strained, "what exactly did you mean about a documentary?" I smiled, the same serene smile I'd perfected during 4 years of their dismissal. "Oh, didn't I mention Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 has been following my story for months? The documentary about family favoritism and its effects on academic achievement features our family pretty prominently. It airs next week." Mom's face went from white to green. "You didn't. You wouldn't." "I absolutely would, and I absolutely did," I replied calmly. 4 years of receipts, social media posts, recorded conversations where you discuss how much easier it is to love the daughter who doesn't challenge you. It's all there, Mom. Every dismissal, every time you chose Amber's comfort over my success, every dollar you spent on her failures while ignoring my achievements. Amber had been standing slightly apart from the conversation, but now she stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Brielle, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I cut her off, not unkindly but firmly. "You knew exactly how differently we were treated. You just didn't care because you were benefiting from it." The reckoning I'd planned was unfolding exactly as I'd hoped, but what happened next surprised even me. Dr. Williams approached our family group, introducing herself to my parents with the kind of professional courtesy that barely concealed her academic disapproval. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison," she said. "I'm Dr. Patricia Williams from Stanford's psychology department. I've been working with Brielle on her research into family dynamics and academic achievement. Her case study is particularly compelling because of the extensive documentation she's provided." Dad found his voice first. "Case study, oh yes," Dr. Williams continued smoothly. "Brielle's experience represents a textbook example of how unconscious bias in parenting can lead to long-term family dysfunction. The fact that she succeeded despite rather than because of family support makes her story even more remarkable." I watched my parents absorb the reality that their private family dynamics had become academic research, media content, and public education material. The pride they'd shown up with that morning had evaporated, completely replaced by the kind of shame that comes from seeing your failures reflected back through the eyes of strangers. The final revelation came when Sarah Martinez approached with her photographer. "Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Morrison," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7. I've been working with Brielle on a story about family favoritism and its impact on academic achievement. Would you be willing to make a statement for our follow-up piece?" The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stood there surrounded by the evidence of their daughter's extraordinary success that they'd played no role in supporting, facing a journalist who was about to make their failures public knowledge. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Brielle, we never meant. You never meant for me to succeed this much without your help," I finished for her. "You never meant for me to document everything. You never meant for your favoritism to have consequences. But intentions don't change impact, Mom." The conversation that followed was brief and painful. My parents tried to justify their choices, to claim they'd always been proud, to insist that they'd treated us equally. But standing there in my graduation cap with honor cords they'd never asked about, surrounded by evidence of achievements they'd never celebrated, their words rang hollow even to them. When the dust settled and the family photos had been taken, awkward, strained photos that captured none of the joy graduation should bring, my parents left earlier than planned. The celebration dinner they'd organized was canceled. The extended family members who'd come to witness my success left confused and uncomfortable after witnessing the most awkward family confrontation any of them had ever seen. But I felt lighter than I had in years. The documentary would air in a week, featuring interviews with me, Dr. Williams, and several other families dealing with similar dynamics. The research paper would be published in a peer-reviewed journal, adding academic weight to conversations about family favoritism. And most importantly, I was heading to Johns Hopkins with full funding and the freedom to continue researching the very family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. The final twist came 2 months later when Amber called me crying. She'd failed 3 classes that semester and was facing academic suspension. For the first time in her life, our parents had told her she needed to figure out her own solution. They couldn't keep throwing money at a problem that seemed to get worse with every dollar they spent. "I don't know how to do this without help," she sobbed over the phone. "I don't know how to be like you." It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged that my independence wasn't natural but learned, forged through years of necessity, while she'd been cushioned from every consequence. "You learn the same way I did," I told her, and for the first time in our relationship I heard something like respect in the silence that followed. "One day at a time, one problem at a time, until you discover that you're stronger than anyone gave you credit for." The karma of the situation wasn't lost on me. My parents' favoritism had backfired spectacularly. They'd created one daughter who was too dependent to function without support, and another who was too independent to need their approval. And now the dependent daughter was facing the consequences of never learning self-reliance, while the independent daughter was thriving beyond their wildest dreams. But here's what I want to know from all of you watching this story unfold. Have you ever experienced family favoritism that shaped who you became? Maybe you were the overlooked achiever, or maybe you were the favored child who later realized the burden that came with always being rescued. Or perhaps you're a parent watching this and recognizing patterns in your own family that need to change. Whatever your experience, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Family karma is real, and justice has a way of serving itself when we least expect it. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, because stories like this need to be shared. Subscribe for more real-life justice stories that prove sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming successful enough that your haters have to watch you win. And please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by their family's investment in their dreams. Thank you for joining me on this journey. of family revenge served ice cold with a side of academic achievement. Remember, sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to become so successful that your critics have no choice but to respect what you've built despite them, not because of them. The greatest gift my parents gave me was teaching me that I didn't need their approval to achieve everything I wanted in life. Until next time, keep proving them wrong and building the life you deserve, regardless of who believes in you along the way.